Okay, well, welcome to April 6th, 2022 to Transit Talk. I'm Rosie Finn. I'm an astrologer in Olympia, Washington. And I've been doing this for quite a while, since 1996. And for quite a few years, my dear friend Carol Trasado and I did a monthly talk at Traditions called Plants and Planets. And for 17 years, we did it. And recently, some things, she passed away 3 years ago. So I've been kind of processing her death. And I've been looking through my old Plants and Planets notes and was looking through them to share with someone, and was realizing some of them really sucked. But then I found one that I thought was really interesting. And I thought that this, it felt comforting to me in this time of such intense unknown and feeling the chaos kind of escalating, that it kind of presents back to February 2011 when I wrote this newsletter. And what I was processing was I was just really acknowledging the shift of Pluto from Sagittarius into Capricorn, and feeling kind of the intensity of things that were shifting. We were heading into 2012. I remember all the hype around 2012 about, the Mayan calendar, and it was the year Jose Argüelles passed away, and there was just a lot that we were kind of sensing like something was coming. So I think today I'm going to kind of go back to the basics and talk about planets through the signs, and go through particularly the outer planets, Pluto and Neptune and Uranus, Chiron and Saturn, and talk about what happens when they're in a different sign and what the zodiac signs are. Because what I was talking about in 2011 about Pluto and Capricorn is really played out. So let's just talk about the zodiac signs to begin with. Just a little introduction. Western astrology uses the tropical zodiac, the tropics, what tropical zodiac does is it divides the sky into 12 equal portions. And it's a belt kind of around our solar system. And the Earth and all the planets appear to move through those signs. And as we're very geocentric in our perspective, which means the Earth is the center of our universe, because this is where we live, the sun travels around the Earth, and or appears to, and all the rest of the planets do. And so they're in a particular sign for 30 degrees of the circle. Divide 360 by 12. And this and the thing about the tropical zodiac is that it begins at 0 degrees Aries on the very first day of spring, when we have the day and the night are exactly the same. So that's where it marks the beginning. The sidereal zodiac, which the Vedic astrologers use, which I use both, it aligns the zodiac with the actual constellations. And this some of this determination of where the constellations end and where a new constellation takes off, astronomically speaking, was only really decided in the 1920s. So you go back before that, and it was a little more not all exactly clear. I'm sure the Vedic astrologers had something that was clear, but in terms of the constellations, the sidereal zodiac that we use, this is really only done since I think it was 27 or something, right around the time that Pluto was discovered. So sometimes we're like off a degree or two. So even in thinking about the transition of signs, we want to kind of acknowledge that, give or take a degree. The tropical zodiac actually has a little more precision to it, because we know exactly the date that our wobbly planet tilts, and we know the date that and the moment when the day is exactly equal to the night. So we have these signs, and there's there's 3 water signs and 3 earth signs and 3 fire signs and 3 air signs. And so we have these elements, and then it's also broken down into 3 movements. I'm forgetting what they're called right now, but there's the cardinal signs, which are the signs of initiation, of creation, of birth. Then there's the fixed signs, which are manifestation, form, bringing things into physical reality. And then there's the mutable signs that are adjustable, flexible, adaptable. Those are the signs more about transformation and shift. So when a planet shifts signs, it's like it's visiting a different realm. And when it's visiting that realm, it takes in the qualities of that realm. It takes in the perspectives that come from all the stars and all the energies that are in that range. So Pluto was in Sagittarius for about 12 years prior to 2008. And Sagittarius is a fire sign. It's a mutable fire sign. And so it's about the fire energy is also about initiation and birth, just like cardinal signs are in a way. But fire signs are more like the ethereal realm. They're enthusiasm. There's a sense of what can we do next? What's possible in the world? How are we going to reach out and do something? There's like an active quality to the fire signs. And Sagittarius is mutable. So you have a mutable fire sign, and Pluto in the mutable fire sign of Sagittarius was visionary. We think of Sagittarius as how can we tune into whatever is possible? It's the sign of hope. It's the sign of joy. It's a sign of opening the doorways. So in that time period, in the late 90s and the early aughts, when Pluto was there was a lot of exploration around new different kinds of ways of thinking about science. And we were talking a lot about metaphysics in terms of you creating our reality. And there was like the biology of belief that came out. And there was a lot of real exploration of what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be on this planet? There was a lot of visionary things that were going on. Capricorn is the sign that comes after Sagittarius, and the sign that comes after a sign is in response to the sign. There's like a responsiveness to the prior sign. So Sagittarius like lightens things up and opens things and opens the doors after the work of Scorpio, which is Scorpio's that deep, intense, let's get to the bottom of things, let's find the truth of the matter. So that was the 1980s, so then the 1990s, late 90s, aughts come in, and it's like, okay, that was, a deep trip into some kind of alternate universe. Now what's possible? Capricorn is response to Sagittarius is responsibility. How do we make this happen? How do we make our visions into reality? How do we take responsibility? Capricorn is the sign that's ruled by Saturn. It's ruled by the planet of tasks and physical orientation, and it's Earth and it's cardinal. So it's the Earth sign. That means it's about like, what's the physical things that are happening? How are we going to deal with the roads and bridges and buildings and governments and organizations and the very kind of concrete structures? Where are the boundaries? Where's the boundary between Russia and Ukraine? Where's the boundary between China and Taiwan? Like, we're looking at the boundaries, and Pluto gets us to look at the boundaries after we've kind of opened the doorways in the 1980s of Scorpio and in the work of the 1990s and aughts in terms of Sagittarius. I mean, when 9/11 happened in 2001, Pluto was in Sagittarius, but it was aligned with Saturn. So Saturn and Pluto, and now I'm forgetting if it was an opposition or a conjunction, but just check. Opposition. Saturn was saying, okay, Pluto, what are you going to do with all of this energy? We're opening the doors. And, then it opened up the doors for a lot of these organizations that have sustained this belief in fear, in terror, right? All the terror organizations, we're being terrorized, we're being attacked, we're being, the world is out to get us. So we have to create this organization called Homeland Security. And it's kind of, it's like them, it's, so, sorry. So in that time period, there was like Saturn was in that place of opposition to Pluto, kind of forcing something to change. And Saturn is like the planet where it's kind of like musical chairs, and we're all kind of dancing around, and then the music stops, and wherever you are, that's what you have to deal with. And there's a sense of that opposition of the music stops. And what were you doing on that day? Where were you? What side of the street were you on? And having to kind of look at what your beliefs are. And there's a lot of beliefs in fear, and that's been like really being propagated, particularly starting in the 1980s with the policies of Gingrich, and the Democratic Party also kind of took some fear-based tactics at that time. So there was like something that was done during the work of Pluto and Scorpio that was kind of deep diving, but not necessarily like coming all the way out, coming out with the truth, but using kind of the manipulation that can happen in that sign to further policies around fear. So then in Sagittarius, it explodes, it opens up, it becomes like a whole belief system. Sagittarius is the sign of belief. So then we get to Capricorn, and Capricorn's like, okay, how do we make that real? How do we take responsibility for that? And I think there's multiple ways to look at this. Of course, there's like a zillion ways to look at this. But one of the things is that during the Pluto and Sagittarius time, a lot of us were kind of looking at how we create our own reality, and the enormous kind of responsibility of looking at, wow, if this is the reality that I have, how much do I have a say in what I'm creating? Am I creating all of it? Am I creating it in collaboration with others? Or is it just, destiny and I'm not creating any of it? Whatever it is, there's a certain sense of responsibility in that. And Pluto in Capricorn has been like forcing us to take responsibility. And the problem is that when we can't take responsibility, the thing that Capricorn does is it condenses, and it makes our world smaller and smaller and smaller, and it moves into more and more contraction. And the thing that I said in the newsletter of 2011, and let me just see if I can pull it up, was first I was like, this isn't in here, but I was exploring kind of what is truth, what are facts, how do we really define these two things? So I'm kind of figuring out is, how does Webster define it? So I'm looking at this thing, which, right now is so prevalent. What is a fact? What is a truth? Who gets to say the truth? Who gets to say the fact? We're looking at censorship. We're looking at how do we get our news, and where does it come from, and who do we trust? So in our culture, we've come to put our trust in scientists and news anchors. And this is 2011, when I guess I still had some like thinking that there was this trust in this. We sort of know we can't really trust the politicians, though we still try. We trust our doctors, scientists. We trust our priests, rabbis, and ministers if we have them. But just imagine what would happen if our scientists started telling us that reality is all made up, and that everything is always changing, and that there are no constants. So this sentence here is really what was really happening. The physicists were coming up with string theory, which was really, and quantum mechanics, like we were really kind of hitting this place where people were being educated that it is always changing. Our world is always changing, both on the macro level and the micro level. We're always in movement. The planet's always moving. Atoms are always interchanging in our body. So this is true. And imagine what would happen if our media started lying to us in a way we couldn't ignore anymore. And I remember thinking at the time, like this was a projection. Like we can still, like at this 2011, we could still pretend that there was media that wasn't lying, but now it's kind of so obvious that we can't really trust what we're hearing so much of the time. And what would happen if our doctors started telling us that some disease was in our minds, or that our emotions had something to do with what was happening in our bodies? Again, now that's like, pretty common knowledge, or commonly accepted thought. Imagine what would happen if 1 in 6 people were diagnosed with a disease that our scientific doctors didn't understand at the level of cause or cure. And here we go, pandemic. And imagine what would happen if our holy people started telling us that we had the ability to create our own reality, and that this thinking started catching on. So, then I say this very like, arrogant, or I don't know, thing that I said. I think it's pretty easy to imagine, which obviously it wasn't easy to imagine, but anyway, I thought it was at the moment. Some people would freak out and start creating a super tight and rigid reality that would become smaller and smaller in order to block out any sense of the tremendous responsibility that these new ideas would accompany. And this is a sentence that I just really was sitting with, because from my perspective in 2011, things hadn't gotten as crazy as they are now. They were getting crazy, but this this media bias, this like people like creating like these alternate universes where they really believe that somebody's sucking somebody else's blood, or they're believing, don't believe in climate change, which, like, to me in 2011, thinking in 2022 there would still be a large part of the population that didn't believe that climate change was happening. I mean, this would have been kind of blowing my mind, I think, at this time. But the sense that the reason this is happening is because our perception of what's real has a lot to do with what we can handle in terms of reality, I think. And this tremendous responsibility that understanding, how much we have to do with our reality brings with it. And the fear is an easy kind of way, it's an easy thing to lean back into. And it's an easy thing to become more and more rigid in the response to growing responsibility. And I think it's this growing responsibility that has a lot to do with Pluto, particularly when Pluto goes into extreme declination. What happens when Pluto goes into extreme declination, 2026 to 2031? It's a time period I've been talking about for years, that we have to become fully responsible to the powers that be. Like, there's no longer a sense that we can keep bowing down to powers that we realize are false, like false gods, false leaders, false rulers. People rise up. And it's about like this sense of taking responsibility that happens, and it happens kind of with many people all together. So we're still a couple of years away from that. We're in this process of how do we take responsibility for our lives? How do we find good news? How do we like know what's true? How do we know what's real? How do we know what's a fact and what's just an opinion? Or is there any difference? All right, they would listen to those that supported this super small reality and help them feel okay not having any responsibility. Well, we can see that happening, right? And some people would be confused but willing to muddle through it. And I have to admit, I didn't think it was going to be me, but man, that's me right now. We're confused and we're trying to muddle through it. We're trying to like figure out what's real, what's not real. And some people would get free. And this is kind of this thing that there is like this tremendous freedom in what's going on, in where we're going, in kind of this, the overwhelming conversations that are happening. Think of the breakdown in consensus reality that would have to happen. So I was kind of defining earlier in the talk, like that reality is kind of what we agreed. Yeah. So this table that my computer's on, it looks like it's there all the time. It looks like it's totally solid. But as Dan Dial once told me, that it's only like coming into phase 10% of the time. So it's only actually existing in physical time, in physical space, about 10% of the time, but I'm just perceiving it to be there all the time. So here's this reality, like you and I are agreeing, you know, I can see some of your faces and I know you're out there, and we're agreeing through something completely invisible, you know, all these waves of electromagnetic waves. And so we're agreeing to this reality, and it's the consensus reality that starts breaking down, and it has to start breaking down. And it does, like every time Pluto goes into extreme declination, because there's always something that's holding humanity back, whether it's a large church organization, whether it's an empire, whether it's well, it's usually one of those two things. And so the consensus reality starts to break down, and there starts to be infighting. There starts to be the chaos. The last time Pluto was in Sagittarius, we had the Great Awakening, it was a time when John Edwards was traveling around the country in tents and like really talking to people, like you can talk directly to God, which was like a mind-blowing kind of concept at the time. It was past, you know, the Reformation. So there was the Lutherans and the Quakers and the Calvinists, and there was the Baptist. I'm not sure about when the Baptists started. Anyway, there was the Protestants, and that had mostly settled in the United States in the colonies. And to like have someone, he was president of Princeton, so he wasn't like just some random radical guy. He was somebody really well respected, who was going around saying, you know, like, let's like wake up, basically. So it awakened the need for freedom of religion. When Pluto went into Capricorn, it had to become real. With all the insights we've had, naturally, we're going to be asked to step up to some pretty big change. So when Pluto went into Capricorn last time, it was really kind of it was the beginning of the American Revolution. It was the beginning of people starting to speak out about taxation and representation. So no taxation without representation. There was, you know, just people really questioning the ideologies and the constructs of the British Empire. And so it was the responsibility that of the colonists who decided to step up and create a different reality and a different organization in a different country. And so that was the last time Pluto was where it is now. And so and I'm going to go back farther. Okay. So this time period, November 2008 to November 2024, is this time of starting the process. So when we get to November 2024, Pluto moves into Aquarius. Now, Aquarius is the sign of freedom. It's an air sign. It's communication, it's connection, it's invention. It's a fixed air sign. So the fixed signs are like the things that really come into reality and come into form. So it's the communication systems that really come into form. It's a time usually of great invention, new thinking, new ways of doing things. It was the American and French Revolution. It was the time period before that was the Reformation. The time period before that was the end of the Crusades and the birth of Switzerland and the birth of some new collaborative organizations that were happening. So each time it's like there's this, like there's people stepping up to responsibility in the Pluto and Capricorn time. And they usually get killed. You know, they don't, like Jesus was teaching in Pluto Sagittarius, Pluto Capricorn times, and he was killed, you know, by trying to like speak out against the Roman Empire and some of the other things that had gotten kind of stuck. And then Mani was teaching at that time period. There was yeah, like Savonarola, who was teaching, got killed, you know, like even though he was saying the same things that Martin Luther said a little bit later. So and now, you know, we're seeing people who are trying to speak out, getting censored, getting exiled, and yet it's not like their voices aren't being heard. They are being heard. They are introducing these new ideas into our reality. And what happens when Pluto gets into Aquarius, and then particularly as it moves into extreme declination, is that we all get it. Like there's some kind of like awakening that happens where enough people get it. Let's just say enough people get it so that the revolution can happen, the change can happen, the shift can happen. I'm going to, let me just, you know, the Roman Empire, to go way back in time. And this diagram doesn't really cover it. And I know it's probably a little hard to read. But I draw these sine waves because they, the peak time period, so 1700 here, 1945, these are when Pluto's in extreme declination on the north side. And when it's on the north side, it's World War. It's, you know, it's Peter the Great, 1700. It's World War II, 1945. And then when we get down to here, it's revolution, reform. And I've been thinking like that the United States is really following a similar trajectory to the Roman Empire. So these two cycles really match this cycle and the prior cycle to the Roman Empire, which isn't on here. So the prior cycle included the Roman Republic. It was the development of the Republic. So when they got to this, this time here that correlates to Pluto in extreme declination on the south side, the Roman Empire was really forming a democracy, a republic, you know, this was like the Senate was gaining a lot of strength and power. There weren't, there was a triumvirate, like 3 rulers. When we get to the beginning of the cycle, in the Roman Empire, it was Cicero, and there was a sense of like thinking about war as being just. There was a civil war that happened. I mean, that was Pompey and Julius Caesar. So there was outbreaks of the Spartacus was happening in that time. So there was like these escalation of things that kind of correlates to what was happening in the United States, Civil War, World War I, an outbreak. So when they got to the peak of extreme declination, which was up here, Augustus Caesar came in and became an empire. He became, he turned it into an empire. He turned it into, let's expand, let's like take over the world, let's, and I'm going to be your emperor. Well, the United States, 1945, FDR, Truman, I mean, Truman dropped atomic bombs, you know, talk about expansion and empire building, but tremendous empire building happened in the 1940s, where we developed the World Bank, we developed the IMF. These were organizations to control financing, oversee financing. It was the creation of the CIA, of our intelligence organizations. Not that they didn't exist before, but the actual founding of the CIA was, I think, 1945 or 6, right at the end of World War II. It had been created during the war, but it came into be this massive organization that has had huge effects all over the world. And taking down countries. I mean, we may not be technically going to war in a certain way, but we are definitely creating destabilization and war throughout the world. And us getting to sit, just like the Roman Empire, here's Augustus, he's expanding and wreaking havoc on the rest of the world. But the Romans were fine. They were all good. They were sitting pretty in their, and he did a lot of work to like create an organization for the government to sustain and take care of people. Right at this justice point where things, there usually turns around, Augustus died and Tiberius took over. it correlates. I put Oprah on this, but this is the Reagan Thatcher years. And I decided Oprah was our Jesus. I mean, I was thinking, what if, 200, 300 years ago, somebody's creating religion? I mean, she has had huge influence. We don't think about her that way necessarily, but I don't know that people thought about Jesus that way either at the time. So, somebody who's a devotee of hers starts picking up the mantle in 2027 and makes it into a religion, just like Paul did at this point in time. So what happened in the Roman Empire is Jesus started preaching, and probably other radicals were going on at this time period. And then they had I was going to say a slew, but they had two completely insane rulers. They had Nero and they had Caligula. So Caligula and Nero were just really seriously crazy rulers, just like we've had some crazy rulers, and particularly the one that we had prior to this one. And not quite sure how this one's doing. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. But they always come before the outbreak, before the change, before the transformation happens. So then what happens after the crazy dictators is there's a revolt. And that's what happened in 60 AD or 70 AD, right around the peak of this time. The Jewish people revolted against the Roman Empire. It didn't go that great for them. Vespasian was a general, and they didn't actually create a new government, but Vespasian became the emperor after that. And so there was this year where there was 4 emperors, and it just was chaos. Everyone was getting assassinated, killing everyone else. And that could be what we're heading into, where it's 4-year stints. It's I'm not even sure that Biden is going to see the rest of his term. He's got some very difficult transits at the end of this year. So he gets to September and he moves into a Saturn time period, and he gets into some really difficult waters. And so we may even see Kamala Harris becoming president next year or later this year even. There's a massive shift that's happening at the end of this year. So and then there could be another quick shift after that, and another quick shift, just like a year of 4 emperors. So this can also be related to, we'll talk about Russia in a minute, but also here's the Putin years here. So they're also about to head into a major revolution. But Vespasian, here's the thing about him. Once he got to be emperor, he wasn't all about war anymore. He was about infrastructure. He's like the emperor we don't know about, because he wasn't crazy, because he came in and he instituted reforms, and he focused on infrastructure, and he focused on welfare, and he focused on education. And so he focused on the sewage systems and helping, people work and have jobs. And, so his focus stopped being about war. And that's what often happens, just like down here, the next cycle, still the Roman Empire. But Diocletian, there was all these massive revolts. The Christians were just martyring themselves like crazy at this time period. And Diocletian was just coming in and killing them under his orders. And then Constantine became emperor, and he was like, okay, I want to be emperor, and I see the writing on the wall, so I'm going to create freedom of religion, which Constantine, during the time of Constantine, there was actual freedom of religion. You could be pagan, you could be Jewish, you could be Christian, and he helped start the Christian church through the Council of Nicaea and all of those rituals that happened. And then the next cycle came, and we had Augustine, and at this time there was an emperor, Theophilus, something like that. He Theo for short, we'll just call him. He made it so that the Roman Empire became Christian, and then that was its downfall. It started to fall apart, and then Rome fell here, and the Byzantine Empire, which was Christian, took over and kind of landed in its footprint. And again, this happened. The Nika rebellion was a terrible rebellion. It was squashed. It was Justinian corralled everybody into the Colosseum in Rome. and just slaughtered them. It was terrible. But then Justinian, after that, also wasn't an expansionist kind of dictator like we see that Augustus was, or he also instituted a lot of reforms, a lot of laws. Some of these laws are even like inspiration for our current constitution. So Justinian also, just like Constantine and Vespasian, all like came in after crazy, violent revolts and insanity, and created reforms, created infrastructure, supported a different civilization. So that's one of the possibilities I see. And this is the time period where the crazy just comes out, because in some ways we have to get it out. We have to see that our reality is breaking down. Because the consensus reality, what we agree to, is changing. And when that changes, it's going to look like a lot of discord. All right. I am going to check the chat function because I've just been going on my riff here. Oh, okay. You guys can see my desktop too. Sorry about that. Wonder how I can. I can't change it right now. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to. All right, this is a good stopping point for the recording, so I'm going to